If you look at the entire media landscape over, say, the last few decades, one genre has just completely dominated. It's moved from these niche corners to the absolute center of pop culture.
Reality television.
Exactly. Reality television, it has fundamentally changed how we even define celebrity. It's everywhere now. You can't really avoid it.
It's totally ubiquitous. But what's really crucial to get is that this isn't some, modern invention. This genre has really deep roots in our desire to just watch real people.
Right, in supposedly unscripted scenarios.
Yeah, and you can trace it all the way back to the late 1940s, a show like Candid Camera.
Oh, wow, that far back.
That far back. It was basically a proto-prank show, right?
Yeah.
It was all about capturing genuinely surprised reactions. But it really gained cultural traction, I would argue, after the 1973 documentary series An American Family.
Okay, An American Family. That was the one that followed the Loud family for, what, 7 months? It was seen by 10 million people.
A huge audience for the time.
And it wasn't about stunts or, competition. It was just documenting the slow, often really painful realities of domestic life divorce coming out. Things television just had never really shown before.
It basically signaled this profound possibility of turning private, emotional life into mass market entertainment.
And globally, the thirst for this kind of content has just intensified. I mean, exponentially, especially in the United States.
Oh, absolutely. Our sources show just how much American audiences in particular really crave it. The U.S. has the largest share of demand for the reality genre.
What's the number on that?
It's clocking in at 15.2% compared to all other global markets. That's a staggering figure. It's significantly higher than the domestic demand for, traditional scripted drama.
And what's so fascinating to me is this tension that just defines the entire genre. It's a tension that we as consumers, we just willingly accept.
What do you mean by that?
Well, on one hand, these shows are packaged and marketed as these authentic glimpses into real life, right? Featuring ordinary people who are just like us. But on the other hand,
critics, and this is the key part, many of the participants themselves allege that what we're consuming is, frequently inaccurate, highly provocative, and just inherently exploitative.
exactly. The very premise of reality TV, that promise of spontaneity, it seems to require this massive amount of planning and manipulation to deliver what they want.
Which is always conflict and high emotion. I mean, the shows just cannot afford for real life to be boring.
Yes. The premise is always that they're capturing the real, but the underlying economic process seems engineered to actively manufacture conflict, to manufacture emotional breakdown.
So that's the mission.
That's our mission for this deep dive. We're going to look past the drama, past the confessionals, to understand the true structural cost. We're going straight to the core. The underlying economic and psychological structures that fuel this relentless need for extreme entertainment.
And the very real human cost borne by the participants in that process. We're going to be drawing on legal, sociological, and ethical source material to map out this engineered reality.
We're investigating the hidden costs, the strategic engineering, and the shifting ethical standards behind this whole facade of unscripted TV.
So where do we start?
Let's start where all television starts.
Yeah.
The balance sheet. Reality TV didn't just explode out of thin air. It had these structural market conditions that pushed it right to the forefront. And the main catalyst for that was, maybe ironically, the scripted writers themselves.
It's fascinating, isn't it? The genre got this major structural boost directly after the Writers Guild of America strikes, the WGA strikes.
Right.
The first key strike was in 1988, but it was really the one in 2007-08 that was so influential. It created this enormous incentive for networks to pivot to programming that just completely circumvented union constraints.
Yeah, let's unpack that timing.
Yeah.
The 2007-2008 WGA strike went on for 100 days.
A long time.
And during that time, networks needed content. They couldn't air new scripted dramas or comedies. Late-night shows went dark. So they leaned really heavily on cheaper, already produced, or easily reproducible content. And reality TV wasn't just a placeholder. It really proved itself as this reliable, year-round alternative.
Precisely. The number one structural advantage of RTV is just pure cost efficiency.
Well,
Since these shows are supposedly unscripted, producers can argue they don't need WGA writers.
even though we know they often hire story editors to, craft scenarios and shape all that raw footage into a coherent, dramatic narrative.
Right. But the biggest saving by far comes from labor. They hire non-professional, non-unionized talent, the real stars, at a tiny fraction of the cost they would pay a guild actor.
We're talking about a massive cost saving here. You're avoiding mandated minimum wages for actors, you're avoiding residuals,
Which, for those who don't know, are the payments performers get every time a show re-airs.
and contributions to pension and health plans. If you're a network executive, suddenly the cost of creating a hit show is drastically lower. The profit margin is just astronomical.
And this leads directly into this crucial legal ambiguity that the industry just aggressively exploits.
Which is?
Reality participants are typically not members of actors' unions or guilds. They're usually classified as contestants, or maybe independent contractors, sometimes just guests.
So there's no clear legal precedent.
None. No clear federal or state legislation that defines the exact nature of the work relationship. So producers treat them as cheap, expendable labor, and they use that ambiguity to their significant financial advantage.
That ambiguity, though, it is facing a very real challenge. One that could, it could potentially dismantle the entire RTV economic model if it really gains traction.
It could.
We found source material indicating that the NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board, has argued that reality TV contestants should legally be considered employees under the common law agency test.
Okay, this is a real deep dive nugget right here, because that term, common law agency test, that's the key.
Explain that for us.
It's a standard legal test. It's used to determine if a worker should be an employee versus an independent contractor. And it looks at the level of control the employer exercises over the worker.
And for RTV contestants, the argument must be pretty strong.
It's very strong. If the producers dictate where you sleep, what you wear, when you eat, what you can even talk about, and they control your environment to that degree, you are not an independent entity. You are fundamentally under the production company's control.
And if that legal finding were to be upheld, if contestants were universally classified as employees, the fallout would be, well, financially catastrophic for the industry as we know it.
Absolutely. The misclassification could open the door to these massive retrospective wage and hour claims. And we're not just talking about failure to pay minimum wage or overtime for the countless hours they spend filming.
No, it's more than that. It's failure to provide mandated protections like meal periods and rest breaks. Imagine being stuck in a controlled environment for 16 hours straight with cameras on you.
Plus, unreimbursed business expenses. If a contestant has to buy specific outfits or travel materials as part of the show, and they're an employee, the company would be liable for those costs. The entire low-cost model relies on avoiding these liabilities by keeping up this fiction that the participants are just people playing a game.
Spontaneously.
So this whole structure is built on finding the right labor. And that takes us into the mechanism of finding talent, which has become this complex business in itself. Some researchers have called it the casting economy.
Right. The myth is spontaneity, but the reality is careful planning.
Yeah.
You can't just pluck random people off the street and expect to get a multi-season hit show.
No, the talent pool has to be managed. It has to be curated for maximum conflict potential. It's a critical balancing act, as one source put it.
So they're casting along specific, predictable types. Cliches, really.
Of course. They need archetypes. They need the hero, the villain, the underdog, the quiet manipulator, the drama king or queen. And they have to balance those types to ensure that week after week there is built-in, predictable tension. They need people who will deliver the drama they need and deliver it reliably.
And this casting economy is sustained by what seems like a never-ending well of individuals seeking fame or adventure, or maybe just escaping their current financial situation. It's an ever-renewing supply of labor.
Yeah, and the people in that cast pool are often previous contestants looking for a second shot, fading celebrities hoping for a career bump. And this very specific, highly sought-after type of participant known as mactors.
Mactors, like model actors.
Exactly.
Right.
Model actors. They're particularly relevant because they already understand the mechanics of being filmed, and crucially, they know how to commodify themselves.
They're experts in what's called effective labor.
Yes. The performance of identity and emotion that production can then manipulate. They commit to being consistently visible and consistently on.
One critic we read noted that on dating shows, for example, participants often labor long and hard, performing this specific marketable version of themselves. The goal is to turn their identity into a purchasing decision for the network and the sponsors.
They view themselves and their emotions as a marketable product.
Which This deep commitment to self-commodification, it ties into a much broader and I think more fascinating sociological critique we found, which is that RTV often serves as this powerful engine for promoting a distinctly neoliberal agenda.
Okay, let's make sure we unpack neoliberalism for everyone listening. It's a term that gets thrown around a lot.
At its core, it's an economic and political ideology. It's marked by minimal government involvement, deregulation, and it sort of eliminates the notion of a public good in favor of radical individual responsibility and a free market ethos.
Basically, if you fail, it's your fault.
Yeah.
If you succeed, it's solely because of your own hard work, no safety nets.
Exactly. And we see this ideological work playing out in two main, really distinct ways across different reality genres.
How so?
Well, first, there's the shaming of the deviant. This is most clear in shows that revolve around judgment and conflict resolution. Think Judge Judy or similar court programs. The focus shifts entirely away from systemic issues and onto personal failings.
Right, these shows focus heavily on individual choices and morality, not just legal justice. The cases they select often feature people demonstrating what the show frames as non-neoliberal agendas.
Like cohabitation before marriage or extramarital affairs, people on welfare, having children out of wedlock.
And the people involved are often labeled as self-made deviants.
And crucially, the sources note that many of these cases feature minorities and low-income individuals. So it further stereotypes that certain groups are unintelligent or chaotic or morally deficient compared to the implied ideal.
Which is the hardworking, moral, white, middle-class, neoliberal citizen who is always responsible for their own problems.
And because the show feels so real, it allows the audience to just easily absorb that ideological message. By watching these bad citizens get condemned, you, the audience member, are immediately situated outside of the issue. You implicitly affirm that you are a good citizen simply because you haven't made those same choices.
It's a mechanism for feeling moral superiority that requires no actual self-improvement.
Right. And then the flip side of that is the active praise of meritocracy. Other shows are all about competition, talent, transformation.
And these programs praise hard work, skill, perseverance, individual transformation. They represent this aspirational new American dream. The core message is that social mobility is achievable for people just like us.
If we just become diligent, hardworking, entrepreneurial, neoliberal citizens.
This idea of meritocracy is absolutely essential to competition shows. I mean, think of a game like Survivor. The core philosophy is pure individual success, outwit, outlast, outplay, even when you have to work in a team.
Or shows like Project Runway or America's Next Top Model, where skill and singular artistic vision are presented as the only things that determine your worth.
And this meritocracy is often reinforced through very distinct class coding. The audience can't just watch someone win. They need a socioeconomic reason why that person deserves to win.
So it's not random.
Not at all. Take the specific example of Survivor, Worlds Apart. That season segregated the contestants into 3 distinct groups: white collar, blue collar, and no collar. This wasn't just a theme, it was a sociological experiment baked right into the narrative.
And the sources argue the show coded the middle and upper class, the white-collar contestants, as what, strategically superior?
Yeah, more clever, inherently more capable of success.
And how is that coding visually represented on screen?
Well, the white-collar team was often portrayed as the most aesthetically put together, more strategically savvy, less reliant on sheer physical labor. The blue-collar group, the factory workers, the laborers, they were coded as strong but lacking foresight, focused only on the immediate physical task.
And the no-collar group?
The artists, the free spirits, they were coded as chaotic, disorganized, and untrustworthy. So by the end, the narrative reinforces the idea that intelligence, strategy, and self-discipline traits traditionally aligned with white-collar aspirations are the true path to success. The message is clear. Upward mobility is the way to win.
So we have this structural model built on cheap, non-union labor, a predictable casting economy, and this powerful ideological undercurrent. But even with low labor costs, the success of this model is heavily subsidized by the advertising engine.
Right. With rising DVR usage and audience fragmentation, viewers are aggressively skipping commercials. Advertisers needed an alternative to the 30-second spot.
And RTV provided this perfect, unique, product-pushing, friendly environment precisely because the non-professional stars are supposed to be real people.
And this is where the price tag gets truly interesting. A short, well-integrated product placement within an RTV program can cost corporate sponsors upwards of $2 million.
$2 million. That revenue stream is a huge subsidy for the already minimal production costs.
And the effectiveness of that placement, It relies heavily on this unique psychological mechanism in RTV, known as the formation of parasocial bonds.
Parasocial bonds, explain that.
A parasocial bond is a one-sided psychological relationship. The viewer feels they know the character, they watch them cry, they watch them struggle, they watch them succeed, and so they feel this deep perceived connection, a sense of trust with that person.
Even though that person has no idea the viewer even exists.
Exactly. And that perceived trust is then effectively transferred directly to the brand being integrated into the show.
So if a viewer identifies deeply with the team on The Amazing Race and watches them use, say, Travelocity's app to book their next flight,
The viewer is more likely to exchange their viewership for what they feel is a trusted recommendation from a real person. It's a highly effective version of word-of-mouth marketing. The non-actor's opinion can be valued even more than someone they know in real life, just because the televised experience is so heightened.
you see this integration working particularly well in competition shows because the product often becomes part of the challenge itself.
Totally. Take Survivor's partnership with Sprint Mobile years ago. Sprint already has positive brand familiarity, right? But seeing a severely isolated, emotional contestant use a Sprint device for a call home with their family, it adds this immense emotional depth to the storyline.
And at the same time, it reinforces the brand's emotional value, all without breaking the narrative flow of the show. It's stealth marketing wrapped up in a tear-jerking moment.
But beyond just consuming products, RTV uniquely utilizes what's termed consumer labor. The audience doesn't just watch, they participate. And in doing so, they generate content and market research for free.
At no cost to the production.
At no cost. This happens through active voting, like on music and talent shows, playing games on show websites, or posting extensively on fan message boards. All of that is invaluable free market research.
And the power of that consumer participation can drive real cultural and technological shifts. American Idol is the quintessential example here.
Oh, absolutely. Its massive social reach helped usher in both texting and later text-to-donate outlets in the U.S.
It utilized media convergence, this new media format of texting, to get market research on contestants while creating this active feedback loop for the show. The sheer volume of participation is it's staggering.
Can you give us some numbers on that?
In its second season alone, American Idol got more than 20 million votes via calls or texts each week. And the most astonishing statistic is that roughly 1/3 of those who sent in text votes reported they had never sent a text message before.
Wow.
American Idol was a colossal factor in ushering in texting as a cultural phenomenon that now, bleeds into every aspect of our lives.
And they leveraged that consumer infrastructure for good, too, the text-to-donate fundraising model.
Right, which was developed in 2005 for Hurricane Katrina relief in partnership with the show. It was the most successful of its kind at the time. It just demonstrates the massive social reach RTV has when it chooses to mobilize its audience for a non-commercial purpose.
So ultimately, this whole casting economy, subsidized by cheap labor, corporate sponsorships, and free consumer data, is finely tuned to ensure high ratings.
But to get those high ratings, you need extreme drama, which leads us directly into the playbook for manipulation. The entertainment model is built on one core objective, the structural imperative for extreme raw emotion.
And we need to circle back to a concept that was initially coined to describe those high-stakes daytime talk shows in the 90s. The money shot.
The money shot.
This is the critical moment when participants completely lose control. They express raw, unfiltered, often shocking emotions on camera: joy, sorrow, rage, remorse. These moments are the currency of reality television.
But this relentless chase for this raw, visceral display of emotion, it has a really fascinating and kind of dark sociological and artistic parallel. Scholars draw a connection to 20th century avant-garde theater, specifically Antonin Artaud's radical concept of the theater of cruelty.
Whoa, okay, that's a huge, almost counterintuitive comparison. How does highbrow dark French theater map onto watching a Bravo celebrity throw a wine glass?
Well, Artaud's goal was profound and totally anti-intellectual. He wanted his theater to deliver a direct, violent attack on the audience's senses and nerves. He wasn't aiming for their intellect or for thoughtful reflection, but directly for their viscera, their gut.
To achieve a collective purgation or catharsis.
Exactly. He sought to reach this defenseless area of communication, preferring the intensity of gestures, shocking images, and raw cries over conventional dialogue.
So essentially, Artaud wasn't interested in making you think. He wanted to make you physically recoil or shiver or feel intensely uncomfortable. It was about shock and raw, gut-punching emotion.
And that's exactly the strategy RTV uses to keep us glued to the screen.
And didn't Artaud also argue that theater shouldn't just imitate life?
Famously, yes. He argued it was life itself, or the double of life, presented in its most extreme, unfiltered state. In RTV, this translates directly to the heightened, manufactured realness that producers create using confrontation, conflict, and emotional excess. It's designed to make the audience feel that immediate, visceral shock or excitement, forcing a reaction, just like Artaud wanted.
And here's where the economics come back into the picture. That consistent, unfiltered display of raw emotion by non-actors, which ironically is what defines their ordinariness in the reality era, it gets immediately converted into what's known as branded effect.
The display of emotion itself is mobilized across media platforms. It becomes a standalone, marketable product.
Think of Bravo celebrities, the stars of shows like The Real Housewives. Bravo actively promotes that term.
Right. Their entire dramatic persona is built on these high-stakes emotional meltdowns. The screaming, the crying, the declarations of love or hate. These moments are then circulated instantly and globally via social media.
Often in the form of short-looped GIFs.
Yes, exactly.
And the circulation of that branded affect is central to their continued celebrity and, frankly, to the network's profitability. Fan-created content, like reality TV GIFs on Tumblr or Instagram, they categorize these reactions by type, crying, shocked, judging.
And the ability for a performer to generate a large number of these easily shareable emotional clips is actually a sign of their success. It's a sign of their potential to develop into a full-fledged brand and image entrepreneur. Their emotional breakdown is a commercial asset.
But achieving this raw, money-shot branded affect, it requires constant structural work by the production teams. They use a specific, non-negotiable playbook of manipulation tactics to elicit that conflict.
They have to push boundaries. They have to purposefully destabilize environments to keep participants on edge and generate those real moments.
And a key tactic, especially in formats that isolate contestants, is intense control and sensory deprivation. Contestants are intentionally removed from their support systems. No phones, no internet, often limited access to television or news.
Which makes them completely reliant on the crew.
Completely. For information, for food, for basic human interaction. This level of control allows the production staff to build what one source called scaffolding for eliciting emotional expressiveness by casting people who are already prone to conflict and then orchestrating volatile situations that trigger them.
We see extreme examples of this structural cruelty in dating shows like Love Island, which came under intense scrutiny after several contestant tragedies.
Right, contestants face these ever-changing elimination rules, which keeps them on constant shaky ground. There's no consistent, regularly scheduled voting process. The structure is fungible. It can be twisted by producers at any time to destabilize a relationship or ramp up anxiety.
And the environment itself is so carefully controlled to induce stress and disorientation. I read that every clock in the villa is deliberately wrong.
Yes, which means the islanders lose their sense of time. It's impossible to establish a natural rhythm. Then there's the mandatory swimwear, which ensures they are constantly presenting a sexualized on-camera identity.
And most chillingly, contestants are chastised over a PA system if they talk too much about topics that are unrelated to this show's central premise, like their past lives, their jobs, or production secrets.
It's a high-stress, controlled environment where contestants are essentially compelled to perform their emotional vulnerability. And it often amplifies pre-existing issues, like disordered eating habits, as one former islander reported.
And if the participants, despite all that environmental stress, still aren't providing the necessary drama, then the editing team steps in.
Yeah.
This is the realm of franken editing and deliberate misrepresentation.
Producers take potentially hundreds of hours of raw footage to create the desired narrative. They openly admit they have to amplify parts of people's personalities and cut scenes to construct clear, marketable heroes and villains.
One contestant on Love Island admitted that an hour-long argument he had was surgically cut down to just 3 minutes. He noted that if you cut any hour-long argument down to 3 minutes, you can easily remove all context and nuance. You can strategically place reaction shots to make either person look volatile or manipulative or just plain wrong. That's how the villain is manufactured.
And the consequences of this distortion can be professionally devastating. It can lead to serious legal action. The key case here involves the Netflix docuseries Afflicted.
Right. That show followed individuals suffering from chronic diseases that doctors often struggle to diagnose.
And the show faced massive backlash because the cast members claimed their stories weren't just misrepresented, but fundamentally distorted. They alleged that the footage was franken-edited to imply their physical illnesses were psychosomatic or psychiatric.
Basically, that their problems were in their heads.
Exactly, undermining their credibility and their need for actual medical care.
That is a serious marker. A lawsuit settled over the malicious misrepresentation of a chronic illness. It makes you realize this isn't just about bad TV, it's about tangible, real-world harm that impacts livelihoods and medical trust.
The controversy was significant enough that a large group of physicians, scientists, filmmakers, and influential public figures petitioned Netflix to remove the series. The subsequent defamation lawsuit was settled in 2023, highlighting the severe consequences of these engineered narratives.
This entire manipulation playbook inevitably leads us to the most critical section of our deep dive: the human cost and the growing crisis around the duty of care. Because producers constantly need to generate that money shot, the pressure on participants to be interesting just climbs every single season.
To keep the audience on their toes and prevent format fatigue, production experts feel they have to keep pushing the genres and the boundaries. But experts stress that if you keep pushing those boundaries, that translates directly into greater and greater risk for the participants year after year.
They're subjected to harsher environments, more invasive scrutiny, and the mental health toll is extensive and widely reported. Contestants report suffering intense psychological and physical harm, leading to acute anxiety and stress disorders. And tragically, in extreme cases, this stress has been linked to suicide.
The deaths by suicide of contestants from Love Island and a guest on the Jeremy Kyle show brought intense public scrutiny to the genre's welfare standards.
Right. These incidents directly led to the Jeremy Kyle show being axed and forced this major reckoning regarding the failure of welfare systems within these high-stakes production environments.
And former contestants frequently report post-show, post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and a profound threat to their self-worth. They operate under these false expectations of continued fame and success, which just rapidly crumble under the pressure of public criticism and the torrent of online abuse.
And many are just left to deal with the anxiety and the shattered self-image entirely on their own once the cameras turn off and the production company moves on to the next season.
The core issue really begins during the casting phase, the calculated exploitation of vulnerability. Some sources suggest that RTV producers actively look for people who are highly emotionally damaged, have pre-existing mental illness or instability, or are just addicted to attention.
To exploit for dramatic television.
They understand that stress makes people break down, and that emotional breakdown generates ratings and therefore profit.
But the casting process usually requires these extensive psychological evaluations and screens. If that's the case, how do vulnerable people still manage to bypass the safeguards and end up on these high-stress programs?
The system has loopholes, and they're often born of the participants' own desperate desire for fame or validation. Candidates who are determined to get on the show may deliberately mask or hide their quirks and insecurities. It's a coping mechanism known as masking, and they do it to intentionally pass the psychological screens.
That suggests a tremendous internal pressure to participate, no matter the personal risk. Do we have specific examples of this kind of masking?
We do. We have first-hand accounts. One former reality contestant admitted to weaning herself off her anxiety medication entirely during the application process so she wouldn't have to disclose its use. She feared that disclosure would automatically get her cut. It demonstrates this deep-seated belief that the risk of going through a highly stressful show unmedicated is worth the potential reward of fleeting celebrity.
So from a psychological perspective, once they're thrust into these exposed environments, what specific groups are identified as being most vulnerable to severe outcomes, like suicide?
Suicide risk is always complex, but research does highlight specific high-risk profiles. Two groups stand out: emotionally vulnerable young males, typically in their early 20s to mid-30s, and older vulnerable men, often mid-40s to mid-50s.
Why those groups specifically?
In general, males have a tendency to internalize emotional issues rather than communicate or process them openly, which makes the intense public shaming and isolation particularly dangerous for them.
And what specific situational factors act as the final triggers or activating agents once they are out of that controlled environment?
The activating agents are often psychosocial and compounded by the show's aftermath. They include relationship breakdown, which is often filmed and broadcast globally, financial hardship after the fame ends, a previous psychiatric history, or symptoms of borderline personality disorder, which makes emotional regulation incredibly difficult under stress.
But there's a critical factor that ties into that sense of shattered self-worth, something psychologists call psychique.
Yes,
Yeah.
psychique. It's defined as an intense, chronic, emotional, or psychological pain that just never goes away. And it often stems from profoundly distorted psychological needs.
For reality contestants, this often relates to an unmet need for love, acceptance, or belonging.
Exactly. They enter the show hoping to fulfill that need, to be loved by millions, but instead they are often edited into a villain, rejected by the public, and subjected to hatred.
So it's not just being sad or depressed, it's this deep, continuous emotional agony tied to a fundamental human need for validation that the show promised but ultimately failed to deliver. That context is crucial.
Precisely. For emotionally vulnerable contestants who feel their deepest needs were not just unmet, but actively exploited by the show and the audience, the pain can become an overwhelming trigger for self-harm.
Given these severe identifiable risks, TV psychologists have made a clear ethical plea for industry change regarding who gets cast.
They argue it should be mandatory for individuals entering any high-profile reality TV show to fully disclose any history of anxiety, depression, or self-harm. And, perhaps more controversially, they recommend that individuals with such histories should not be auditioned.
And their reasoning is?
Their reasoning is that putting highly vulnerable people in these combustible psychological atmospheres could be potentially dangerous, with profound legal and ethical implications for the production company and the broadcaster.
That really shifts the conversation from just providing aftercare to ethically restricting participation. Let's talk about the industry's response to this duty of care crisis. Did production companies initially take the advice of mental health experts seriously?
Historically, the answer is often no. Early efforts by mental health professionals to establish ethical guidelines were often ignored or minimized by producers. Advice was viewed simply as a box-ticking exercise.
Just a legal requirement.
Exactly. Especially when the show's senior leadership did not fully support the psychologist's recommendations. This failure was prevalent in the early 2000s as RTV formats shifted aggressively from social experiments to pure entertainment focused on conflict.
However, the tragic deaths forced a significant and permanent change, particularly in the UK, where there was intense media and parliamentary scrutiny.
Yes, broadcasters like Channel 4 and ITV are now under pressure to provide comprehensive, continually updated duty of care protocols before, during, and after filming, especially with the relentless rise of social media abuse.
And following the tragedies involving former contestants, Love Island producers who were at the epicenter of the crisis, they introduced specific new guidelines.
They did. These now mandate a minimum of 8 therapy sessions for each islander upon returning home. And furthermore, they maintain proactive contact with participants for up to 14 months after the show has ended, recognizing that the emotional hit often comes long after filming concludes.
It's important, though, to acknowledge the nuance here. Channel 4, in their evidence to the UK Parliament, they highlighted several cases where RTV had a positive public service impact. They argue the genre itself isn't inherently evil.
Right, it's context dependent. They also argue that restricting who can participate, even those with mental health histories, would be discriminatory and would limit the range of stories that have the power to generate empathy.
And their own research supports this claim of positive impact.
They cite shows like Naked Beach, a body-positive show, which was shown through academic assessment to result in statistically significant improvements in body image for contributors a year after filming.
Similarly, the documentary series The Undateables, which followed people with disabilities seeking love, reportedly led to 80% of viewers feeling more sympathetic and 77% realizing they had shared interests with disabled people. When ethical completion and social impact are prioritized over maximizing conflict, RTV can be a powerful vehicle for public good.
Yet, even with modernized protocols and extensive aftercare, a major ethical gap remains, particularly in protecting participants after they leave the controlled set and go back to their civilian lives.
The gap is the social media landscape. Broadcasters note that while they can provide mental health aftercare and support, the contributors have very little legal protection or recourse against the torrent of online abuse or intrusive press coverage they face.
And the psychological harm doesn't just stop because the cameras stop rolling.
Exactly. So they argue quite compellingly that responsibility has to be placed on the shoulders of the social media platforms, Facebook, X, Instagram, to aggressively address online abuse targeted at reality TV contributors.
Because broadcasters have limited power once the show leaves that controlled environment.
Ultimately, the psychological risks inherent in the RTV model, where engineered conflict is paramount for profit, are now a known quantity. And that shifts the ethical burden onto the creators and potentially onto us, the consumers.
That's the critical pivot point we need to consider. The production model relies entirely on maximizing visibility, often at the expense of psychological stability, because visibility is what generates the branded effect that the entire business model is built on.
This has been a necessary, but I think a heavy look at a genre many of us consume mindlessly as pure escapism. So to summarize our deep dive, we've explored how modern reality television operates on a foundation of cheap, non-union labor.
A structure secured largely after historical writers' strikes. And this labor model is aggressively exploited by production companies because of the legal ambiguity surrounding contestant status, an ambiguity now being challenged by the NLRB.
We detailed how the entertainment value is structurally engineered, relying on the predictable tension and raw emotional performance of the money shot. A concept, as we learned, related to Artaud's theater of cruelty, designed for visceral shock.
And this raw emotion is quickly converted into branded affect and circulated globally as shareable content like GIFs, all underpinned by legal contracts that limit production liability.
We also explored the critical human cost, noting that the pressure to escalate drama leads to greater and greater risk for participants, resulting in documented psychological harm, including PTSD, and tragic outcomes like suicide, especially when vulnerability is exploited during casting.
And the unavoidable tension is that reality television is not going away. In fact, it continues to expand globally and across digital platforms, fueled by high audience demand, particularly here in the US.
And while we noted that some brands, like Survivor, actively attempt to mitigate harm by prioritizing ethical operations, the genre's core economic engine remains dependent on maximizing conflict and visibility.
And this brings us to the final provocative thought. The success of the casting economy, this endless well of people willing to commodify their rawest emotions and hide their vulnerabilities just to get on camera, relies entirely on the audience's willingness to consume the resulting meltdowns and manufactured cruelty.
Given that we now have documented knowledge that RTV success often depends on exploiting psychological vulnerability, and given that research specifically links RTV viewing habits to higher scores on the voyeurism scale, defined as an intense interest in observing unsuspecting people's private emotional lives, we have to ask.
What is the viewer's ethical responsibility when choosing to participate? Not as a contestant, but as a consumer of this branded affect.
When you press play on that clip of an emotional meltdown, knowing the mechanisms of destabilization and exploitation involved, are you not contributing directly to the demand for that greater risk, demanding the next step in the theater of cruelty? It's something to mull over the next time you scroll through those highlights and share a reality TV GIF.